Chessbox Worldwide. Today we are diving into a modern classic from the 2025 Esports World Cup, a game that had everyone on the edge of their seats. The Fury Alireza Firouzja takes on the legendary Magnus Carlsen, the GOAT, in a masterclass of positional play, tactical brilliancy, and a jaw-dropping finish. Get ready to witness a novelty in the opening, a tense battle for the center. This is chess at its highest level. You won't want to miss a single move. Chess, in partnership with chess.com, was featured at the Esports World Cup for the first time in 2025 with a staggering $1.5 million prize pool. This tournament was part of the Champions Tour 2025, brought together 16 of the world's best players, many of whom were signed by major esports clubs. The format was fast-paced, sharing group stages and knockout playoffs with a time control of 10 minutes and no increment. This modern high-pressure environment, which included players competing on stage with heart rate monitors, culminated in Magnus Carlsen of Team Liquid defeating Alireza Firouzja of Team Falcons in a thrilling grand finale. Ladies and gentlemen, let's enter into the action. White pieces. Alireza Firouzja played e4, and we see e5 from Magnus Carlsen, knight f3, and we see knight c6 defending the pawn, bishop c4, which brings us the Italian game, bishop c5, c3, knight comes to f6, and after d3, defending the pawn, which is on e4, h6, and in this position, b4 it can be played, or short castling, but Alireza Firouzja picked on b4, hitting on the bishop, and after bishop goes back to b6, he played f4, trying to go ahead and trap the bishop with one a5, s6, opening up a running square for the bishop. In this position, queen b3 can also be considered, but he decided to play short castling, and Magnus played short castling too. Knight becomes to d2, d6, opening up for bishop, and now rook e1, h3, stopping the bishop coming on g4 can be played. So he played h3, and now we see bishop comes to a7. In the future, he's creating an opportunity to go ahead and advance the pawns. Rook comes to e1, trying to open up a square for the knight sit on f1. Knight, he has fully opened up a way of how we could expand on the queen side. Firouzja plays knight f1, plan to put the knight on g3. Knight comes to g6. We said the knight has been on c6, has moved to e7, final on g6, maneuvering the knight to its archway square. This is fantastic play. Knight g3, and after c6, with now is aiming to go ahead and push the pawn on b5. Bishop goes back to b3 by Alireza. Now plan to go ahead and push the pawn on d4. Now we see d5, counter-attacking the center, and after e takes d5, knight takes d5. So in this position, it's a pawn which is on e5 is hanging. But however, in case white wants to win this pawn, they can lose the rook, for example. In case of knight takes e5, then we could see knight takes e5, and after rook takes e5, bishop takes f2 check, and after king takes f2, queen f6 check, checking the king and also trying to win the rook, which is on e5. That's why after knight takes d5, Alireza first of all played bishop comes to d2, defending the pawn on c3, and now rook comes to e8, defending the pawn, queen c2, trying to connect the rooks. c4 is also a powerful move, and now we see bishop e6, rook comes in to d1, and now we see queen c7, moving away from the battle of the rook. And in this position, Alireza Firouzja played c4, hitting on the knight. Now we see that the bishop, which is on d2, is putting an eye on the pawn, which is on b4. Knight comes into f4, bishop takes, knight takes, pawn which is on e5 is hanging. But for example, in case of knight takes pawn, then this is purely winning for Magnus, because Magnus will go ahead and play bishop d4, attacking the knight, and after knight f3, knight h3 check. Now we see that the bishop has pinned down the pawn, the queen is looking at the knight which is on g3, and I can tell you this is purely winning for Magnus. That's why after knight takes f4, Alireza Firouzja played pawn c5, trying to cut off the bishop, and now he's fully ready to take the pawn, which is on e5. We see bishop takes b3, queen takes b3, and now in this position we see a5, 4, just ignoring the threat, e takes d4, and now he played rook takes e8 check, and after rook takes e8, he played rook takes d4, rook comes d8, asking an exchange, rook e4, maintaining the rooks in the game, pawn takes b4, and after rook takes b4, you see that the rook is also putting too much pressure on the pawn which is on b7. Then now we see rook d7, defending the pawn which is on b7, rook e4, and in this position, bishop takes c5, rook e8, check should have been considered, followed by bishop falling back on f8, but however, Alireza played queen c4. Magnus Carlsen didn't wait for any more explanation from Alireza. He played bishop takes f2 check, sacrificing a full bishop. And after king takes f2, Magnus played knight d3 check. And after king comes in, queen takes g3. Now in this position, you said rook e8 check comes in. In this position, after king comes to h7, queen comes in to check on e4. g6. After g6, this was a lost game, and Alireza Firouzja had a few minutes on the clock. So he went on and played rook e7, and Magnus Carlsen delivered a checkmate, f2 check, and I can tell you this was the game which made Carlsen the champion of the Esports World Cup, the first edition. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in your game.